Mad Father is considered one of the best games to come out of the early 2010s RPG Maker horror scene, despite the fact it was made in a completely different engine. MISAO, an older game from the same developer, has always been in the periphery of such acclaim. Though some will say it matches or even outdoes its own successor, it's yet to achieve the same level of popularity. I played Mad Father back in the day and enjoyed it, but despite vaguely knowing of MISAO and thinking I'd have a good time, I didn't end up giving it a try until just 2 years ago. And now, I understand this discrepancy in reputation. Without its association and pedigree, I probably wouldn't have stuck around past the introduction. I think what makes a good intro is the ability to show off your positive qualities as quickly as possible, so as to impress upon the audience a reason why you're worth the time. The Witch's House, for example, gives the player the basic premise and a tone-establishing gameplay moment in the span of just 2 minutes. On the other end of the spectrum, Quartz Party takes about half an hour to show off the characters in normal life and beginning the scenario before it throws you into the gameplay, but critically, it starts off with a character telling a ghost story by candlelight, showing off its true tone and capacity to be spooky immediately, while also hinting towards later developments in the narrative. These two have very different approaches, but they're both quite efficient with their time and effective in conveying the nature of their respective games. MISAO doesn't do this very well at all. It takes a little under 15 minutes before it really opens up, and that time can be divided into 2 sections, the boring part and the scary part. The first scene conveys that MISAO has been missing for a few months and the protagonist is a little bit concerned about it, something that I can convey in a single sentence. 5 more minutes are spent on introducing the other major characters who will show up in the game, all of whom have personalities I can also summarize in a single sentence. Yoshino is just a bully. Satome is a popular girl who's also sometimes a bully. Kudo is the quiet kid. Toma is a dumb jock who flirts with everyone. Ayaka is in love with Kurata. Their archetypes are so obvious that we don't need an understanding of their baseline to comprehend the way they're depicted later in the story. The second half of the intro, a cutscene-heavy walk-around section which depicts most of them dealing with the spooky scenario, does a much better job at quickly displaying them as characters while getting across the tone. But it's hampered by the fact that we already know what kind of tropes they are. There's little new information here besides that the game will be scary. The conversation with Onegawara that closes off the opening is also hampered by repetition. He just explains that the school has been transformed and isolated by the power of Misao's curse, something that the characters already spent most of the first half of the opening speculating about. Neither of these moments give much of anything that you couldn't just glean from genre convention and reading the title of the game. The characters immediately jump to the conclusion that it's Misao's curse and repeat it so much in this part that it seems like they also read the title of the game. If the second half of this opening was put after a much shorter preamble, not only would it have been more effective, it would have helped put the player into the action a lot quicker. Which would have been good, seeing as the main gameplay loop is probably the best part of Misao. You mostly just run around doing puzzles to make progress. While some puzzles are restricted to single rooms or single floors, some have parts and pieces scattered all over the school, meaning you have to explore to figure out what to do. As I've said before, this mechanical baseline is good for story-heavy games in pixel horror because it encourages the player to pay close attention to the environment and events and to consider everything in their mind, or else they won't know what to do or where to go. So when you do something spooky or interesting, it will stick with them more. This setup is pretty common for games in this particular subgenre, popularized by the likes of Quartz Party, but MISAO is set apart from the rest in 2 key ways. First of all, this game loves to inflict unique and sudden death onto the player. When you first get to control your character after that conversation with Onegawara, you'll probably save your game and then wander either to the end of the hall or up a floor to the roof. Should you do the former, you'll be given an obvious setup to inspect the flowers, with no other option but to walk away. But if you do inspect the flowers, you'll be pricked by a thorn, infected with poison, and immediately game over. Should you do the latter, you might wander to one of the only 2 points of interest on screen, watch as your character is pulled from the roof, and game over. You might even experience both of these things in succession. Either way, you're going to encounter some traps and get an understanding of the ways the game will challenge your progress. Now, I just brought up the Witch's House and Quartz Party earlier. That's because Misao's game over system can be compared to both of them. Although it mostly resembles the various sudden and unique deaths of the Witch's House from the Your Reliance on Pixel Gorge, the occasional humorous contrast, the game catalogs and remembers which ones the player has endured, even rewarding you for getting every single one, like Quartz Party does with its grand and elaborate death scenes. I bring this up because I think those other 2 games are good examples of different systems achieving their own goals, and MISAO coincidentally being somewhere in the middle exposes a bit of its own weak points. The Witch's House and Quartz Party both consider their game over as a punishment, but in different ways. Quartz Party is liberal with saves because the idea is generally that the consequences of failure are the inherent horror of what happens in the wrong end scene, not a loss of progress. Quartz Party, being a story-heavy game, generally wants to give the player a sense of forward momentum in the narrative, and although there are some wrong ends that break from this trend, most of the time it tries not to interfere with itself. The Witch's House, meanwhile, is well willing to punish a player either by setting them back to the last time they use a save point, or by putting them in a difficult encounter they'll have to try at multiple times. Misao's game overs are hardly punishment punishments at all. Although making a permanent save is a bit more trouble, all you need to do to make a quick save is press a button. Unless you were to accidentally softlock yourself, you'll rarely be more than a few seconds away from right back where you were before. I'm willing to grant the game that it has some mildly effective moments, but most of these deaths are too short and try for a comedic tone, so they're hardly scary. I guess in some sense this could be considered more of a thriller game or a dark comedy, but few of the game overs elicited more than a light exhale from me, since the joke was basically the same every time, just something killing you out of nowhere. The one I appreciate most is the height of absurdity, the ringtone that startles the protagonist so hard they hit the nearby wall and die instantly. This is such a great and memorable gag, and such an easy trap to fall into, that it's a necessary part of a puzzle later on, which I thought was clever. The second thing that makes MISAO unique is the non-linear progression. So the endgame state is going in the shrine with 6 key items and 4 dead people, but the path to this end is long and branching. One of the earliest encounters you can get is Sabtomi in the computer room, being attacked by some monster. This event brings about 1 dead person, but it also kicks off the beginning of a questline with Toma, which ends with you gaining a key. The computer room is also important to enter the lab to find Yoshino, who will also die, resulting in 3 outcomes. Washing off the blood from hiding while Yoshino died allows you access to the shrine, and the power turning on in the lab gives you both a bomb to enter the self-contained cave section where you get one of the key items, and salt to go down a hall to get a box. Toma's key opens this box, and this item allows entry to a room with some weird lore thing and another key item. Though it's one of the earliest ones, it's also by far the longest and most complex path. The only other comparably complex storyline is a fairly short one that ends with a linear quest involving Kurata and Ayaka in the infirmary, which is only activated after encountering both of them for the first time, which can be done in either order. This storyline grants 2 key items and 1 more dead, but branches both in and out the most, making it a bit difficult to describe despite its brevity. There's only 2 more paths I can talk about, and they mark a stark contrast regarding the acquisition of the key items. One questline takes the player all over the map where you have to grow, recolor, and place flowers. This is unique in that it's independent from any character-related storyline, it just gives you a key item at the end. I don't even think it can be said to imply anything about the greater story, but it doesn't feel like the isolated chunk that it is, because you're probably going to find these scattered pieces of this puzzle while going around the game and accomplishing everything else. The final storyline is Kudos, which starts with the random procurement of a bat, the only item which is never removed from your inventory after use due to its importance later on. Kudo is at the end of one of the earliest and possibly most unique instances of a genre staple, the keep moving forward room. Usually this room will lead the player astray with hazards or fake points of interest, but this one takes a unique approach of an untelegraphed locked door, dooming you if you don't already have the means to progress. I'm not sure where this trend started, but I wouldn't be surprised if, considering all the other similarities, this inspired the Witch's House. After Kudo's death scene, you're led to an otherwise unobtainable key item. This is a fairly evocative difference, as it makes me wonder if there was another character planned who would have occupied a point in the flower questline, or if there was more puzzles planned following Kudo's demise, but one or both had to be taken out due to the constraints of time or complexity. I think that this system isn't perfect. There are times where if a puzzle has the player stumped, they might wander around wondering if they're missing something, but maybe they just haven't figured out an obvious isolated puzzle. But to be fair, it's also just cool to be able to bounce around between the different paths of progression, slowly making progress on things in whatever order the player just so happens to decide upon. MISAO has a flow to it that not only makes for a smoother experience, but also helps make it interesting and distinctive from other RPG Maker horror games. Now for the opposite of interesting and distinctive, let's talk about the story of MISAO. The original version of MISAO released in March 2011, a little over 7 months after the PSP release of Quartz Party. This is important context because MISAO rips several plot points right from Quartz Party. Sure, a lot of the basic premise is commonplace enough to be generic. A bunch of kids ending up in a haunted place is a hallmark of the genre because a single building with lots of rooms facilitates puzzle and exploration extremely well. You see that with schools, hospitals, tenements, mansions, whatever is common enough to fit the bill, while also being intuitive enough that the average audience already gets it. And a plot about appeasing a vengeful spirit, I couldn't tell you how many horror movies do exactly that. But it's in the details where MISAO's inspirations become a bit clearer, like the fact that the characters being sent into the decrepit haunted school happens alongside an earthquake, or that the vengeful spirit's backstory involves both a sexual assault and a murderous school staff member who buries her to hide the evidence. And in the one example that single-handedly convinced me of all this in the first place, the fact that everyone who died in the haunted school is forgotten by those in the normal world. In Quartz Party, this was something with plenty of subtle foreshadowing, and it fit perfectly into the themes of loss and tragedy, crafting a conclusion that captured the feeling of almost no no one can understand what you're going through. Little known fact, there's an alternate unused version of this ending where the dead are replaced by imposters, and judging from that, you can tell they put a lot of thought into a supernatural reason why the main characters become emotionally isolated, and I can appreciate that effort that went into the game. MISAO is the opposite of all this. There was no foreshadowing, this ending doesn't meaningfully interact with the themes, and clearly very little thought was put into it. In fact, this sort of contradicts the beginning of the game, where the characters speculate on MISAO's curse. If all of MISAO's victims are erased, how would they know this? Or, if it only applied to the main characters, then why? I feel like the clumsiness of the intro is probably explained by the need to write over a weird detail of the aforementioned sexual assault plotline, where the boy who shows up is some random unnamed character. I'm sure at some point it was thought, oh wait, if MISAO is getting revenge on the people who ruined her life, why isn't he here too? And the answer to that question was, he died off screen. As a refresher, the equivalent character in Quartz Party is shown being forced to repeat his moment of death for all eternity. Or I guess the equivalent character would actually be Kurata. The endgame is centered around whether the final dead soul will be Toma, MISAO's dumb ex-boyfriend, or Kurata, the suave teacher. If you kill Toma, you get the bad ending, because he was actually a good guy. Kurata, meanwhile, turns out to have killed MISAO. I imagine the game considers this to be a really good twist, but aside from the overly obvious signaling, such as the fact that Kurata is based on Yoshikage Kira down to the hand fetish and changing his face, the question is framed around a binary outcome. Even if you assume the wrong answer, you'll have to at least consider the right answer, so it won't become as much of a surprise. For comparison, what you could call the big twist of Quartz Party was the answer to two different open-ended questions the game had proposed for about a third of its runtime up to that point. In basically any area you could compare the writing of these games, MISAO just doesn't measure up, and it kinda brings these unflattering comparisons upon itself by copying so much from Quartz Party. You'd think at least in the areas where MISAO is distinct from Quartz Party, there would be something good. Like, hey, in Quartz Party the ghost kids all died long before the main characters were ever born, but in MISAO, basically all of them interacted with her. Imagine how interesting it would be to get the dead girl's backstory delivered by the people who experienced it firsthand, something Quartz Party couldn't really do. But no. Instead, all the backstory is delivered by the player viewing out-of-body flashbacks, depicting one-dimensional characters giving MISAO a shit life. The most that any character deviates from their archetype in the prologue is Kudo, who was childhood friends with MISAO but never defended her from bullying for some reason. And what about Onigawara and Library, the two somewhat original-seeming characters who have some connection to the other world? These two remain mostly unexplained throughout the main story. Well, if you want answers, you're not really gonna get it from MISAO. On that note, I have another comparison I want to make, and I feel like this one is MISAO's biggest killer, because even if unrelated but similar games such as The Witch's House or Quartz Party didn't exist, MISAO would still be completely outclassed by Mad Father. But before that, here's 1 minute of my friends and I making fun of this game.
I think I have a tranquilizer on my desk in the faculty room. What the fuck? You're a teacher, dude. Yeah, I just have like fucking horse tranquilizers on my fucking desk.
I have a crazy amount of ketamine, I'm not gonna lie.
You gotta do what you gotta do to get through the day.
I will, because MISAO is my friend. We didn't know her. What?
Let's trade numbers. 7.
Oh, okay.
3.
I'm afraid I've won this game of bigger number.
This dialogue is so fucking...
Oh, shit!
Yeah.
We'll flavor text. Just say dolls. Don't elaborate at all.
You're gonna show up and, like, she's gonna be, like, dead or, like, murdered or something.
Dead or murdered. That's crazy.
Yeah, then you're gonna go back and, she's gonna be dead.
I don't see the cat
Yep.
anywhere.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
Ayaka!
The moral of this game is that, like, being damaged in high school affects you forever and you can never recover from being bullied. You just become a psychopathic murderer or evil ghost.
Why is she in there, though?
What
My
the
father
fuck
reference?
is that?
The dude on a Segway
What the
with a
fuck?
chainsaw. Listen, okay, I'm not just a hater. I thought Mad Father was really good. The reason why I made a video on MISAO in the first place, more on that later, is because I prefer to speak on works that evoke the strongest emotional reactions within me, whether that be positive, negative, or some conflicted mix of both. And overall, I just disliked MISAO more than I liked Mad Father. Though I still feel I'm being a bit unfair to Sen's work by focusing on only the lesser of their two magnum opera. So I want to take a short aside to give praise to Mad Father before I end off with even harsher criticism of its predecessor, and also the remake. In Mad Father you play as Aya Javis, the daughter of a mad scientist, hence the title. The first thing I find impressive in comparison is the intro. There's an opening credits sequence set to a song. Sure, why not? But after that, we get into actual cutscenes. Aya knocks on a door, complaining that it's hard to sleep and reminding her father about the anniversary of her mother's death, setting up her as meek but very concerned about her parents. The father lightly reprimands her, but is quick to come to the door and tries to comfort her as soon as he sees that she's upset. This establishes him as mildly stern but deeply caring towards Aya, and the conversation topic also reveals the death of Aya's mother. Then he starts torturing some screaming person with a chainsaw, and Aya narrates that she knows this is happening but feigns ignorance because she loves her father. She also says she knows that her father has been in a relationship with his servant, Maria, and a scene depicting their dynamic then follows, in which Maria also gives concern for Aya disliking her. This basically establishes every major character and how they feel about each other in only 5 minutes, already giving these characters more depth than anyone in MISAO and with much more subtlety. The player can spend 5 or so minutes on a cutscene-heavy walk-around section in Aya's room, where certain objects will trigger short memories of happy times spent with her mother and father. 10 minutes in, the scary part begins. Aya goes out into the hallway and is approached by 2 zombies and then a boy missing an eye. She runs back into her room and then meets a man named Ogre, who you might recognize as Onigawara, except he wears a hat sometimes. In a short conversation, Ogre explains that the victims of Aya's father are being brought back by a curse, and Aya goes out to try and save him. Here, at around 12 minutes in, you're finally set free to play through the game. This introductory segment has a lot in common with MISAO, going from the normal life of the characters to a walk-around bit, getting to the spooky part halfway through, and finally having the exact same character explain the situation to the protagonist. But not only does this get to the gameplay faster than MISAO, it's also just overall more interesting. It at first seems as if it's going for a Victorian sci-fi premise with the father's experimenting, but then it swears into a supernatural haunting, which can actually maintain any benefits of form granted by the former while also giving the victims even more of a grudge from not only being tortured and maimed but also killed by the father. None of the characters currently have obvious parallels to those in MISAO, and all of them have more than one dimension of personality. Maria isn't completely absorbed by the man she loves, the father has a contrast between his evil experiments and his roles as a seemingly genuine loving father, and although Aya behaves like a normal little girl, she's given the nuance of indifference to her father's crimes, a character flaw that the story promises to challenge her on. This is why pretty much every puzzle centers around some victim or experiment of her father. Although the games play fairly similar, Mad Father attempts to be a lot more serious than MISAO and has a relatively standard take on game overs. It also becomes fairly linear halfway through, the only reasons to backtrack being for hidden collectibles or to unlock the true ending. And although it may at first seem to have the same haunted location premise of a mansion/evil laboratory, it has a key difference from most in its genre, in that this is where the main character has lived for all of her life. Instead of deriving horror from the unfamiliar, this is all familiar to Aya, and that's precisely what Mad Father is aiming for. Fear of the familiar becoming corrupted. This theme is very obvious even early on, not just from her coming to learn the depths of her father's actions, but also from seeing that her mother's spirit is the one behind the curse. The home she lives in, the dolls she's surrounded with, even her father and mother, they all turn into death traps and deadly monsters in one way or another. The climax of this idea comes at the very end, where after confronting and stopping her mother, Aya learns that not only does her father intend to turn her into a doll, he also killed her mother in pursuit of this goal. It's only, ironically, with the help of Maria and the blonde boy, 2 characters whom Aya was previously afraid and mistrustful of, that she's able to escape her father's rampage, solidifying not only the main theme of the familiar turning against you, but also its opposite, the kindness of strangers. And then, right at the ending, the game does it again with its ultimate conveyance to the idea by having a grown-up Aya seeming to carry on her father's legacy. It is a bit ambiguous, so it can be taken as Aya embodying the theme of kind strangers by giving care to random people for free, but I prefer the darker interpretation. Now the player is experiencing the same corruption of the familiar that the protagonist endured the whole time, as that character, seemingly out of nowhere, turns to evil. Mad Father has an idea, a feeling it wants to evoke within the player, and it acts upon that about as well as any game can in this format. Oh yeah, and although it doesn't explain everything about Ogre, this does show off the origins of Library and the zombie scientist in MISAO. Oh hey, speaking of which, what exactly was the core idea of MISAO? So, if you're just going off the main story, MISAO might seem shockingly shallow. Like, bad people die? That's not really anything. However, the post-game after-story, labeled Truth, seeks to reframe the events of the game and MISAO as a character. The premise here is basically that MISAO is trapping the souls of those who died in the other world, and also kidnapping Toma again. So the protagonist is brought in to free everyone. And I think the inherent message of this is about moving on. If you never let go, like MISAO, then you become a monster. And in that sense, the revenge plot of the main game is presented as maybe a little bit of a bad thing. To my understanding, Truth was added in an early update to the original version, so long ago that it almost seems like it's been there all along, but still with enough time that the developer could reflect on their work and the feedback it received. I can certainly feel a significant shift in the style of writing and gameplay between Truth and the base game, and I assume that's why the tone changed so noticeably. However, there's a bit of dissonance where it feels like the goals of truth come into conflict with the events of the main game. Now, I don't have any issue with the depictions of Kudo or Sao Tome. Their crimes were ultimately so petty that they probably could have been hashed out in a conversation, rather than requiring them be killed and tormented. So freeing them and allowing them to be reborn is perfectly fine by me. There's also a bit where you can see Ayaka's last moments, which were merely implied in the main story, and it's pretty unnecessary, but inoffensive. The problem, I feel, starts to come up with Yoshino. She's way worse than the other two, not only beating, harassing, and blackmailing Misao, but also subjecting her to sexual violence. That's a level of cruelty well beyond they could just talk it out. More than that, it's obviously traumatizing for Misao, and criminal for her, and the unnamed boy. Yoshino is willing to risk ruining lives, including her own, all for the sake of hurting Misao, with her only reasoning given being she's jealous that Misao is dating Toma. And yet, the game treats her redemption as basically a given. Aki says that Yoshino seems to really regret it, and that's good enough apparently. I just personally think there was something wrong with her. But hey, maybe there wasn't enough time to really dig into that, so they just had to rough her up and act like that made it fine. She's a baby now. That alone would be ultimately a minor issue. But there's another part of truth that I would say single-handedly turned the game from being overall mediocre to downright atrocious in my eyes. Once you free all the other spirits, another island opens up. Here, alongside the aforementioned hairpin, you can find Kurata's grave. The Kurata section is different from all the others. It's much longer and contains numerous sections hopping haphazardly throughout his entire life, including some in which you, the player, control him just walking around. This chiefly attempts to paint him in a sympathetic light, not just from literally putting you in his shoes. We see him being bullied as a child, feeling valued only for his looks as an adult after getting plastic surgery, and even trying to save a wounded stray cat. The last memory depicts him falling in love with and confessing to the only person who ever gave him the time of day, and when she refuses his advance and admits she only protected him out of pity, he lashes out while crying. The final scene after this has the protagonist approach Kurata, stabbing the corpse of Misao, where he's lamenting his life. Aki then hugs him and assures him that all the students in the school thought he was nice and reliable. When the player is brought out of the scene, they see a cat in front of Kurata's grave, implying this is his reincarnation, just as the other kids turned into babies. This is fucking dog shit. I struggle to even understand the morality of the work here. Generously, I think it's trying to make an argument against punitive justice, instead focusing on healing the victim and reforming the wrongdoer, because otherwise everyone suffers and is made worse for it. This would explain why Misao's tormentors are allowed to reincarnate, and why the truth ending focuses first on Misao's monstrous transformation and then on making her smile by being her friend. And while, in the abstract, I do agree that's how the justice system should operate, the game does such a terrible job supporting its own ideas that it comes across as almost apologetic for evil. Kurata is a grown man who sexually assaulted a high school girl and murdered at least 2 innocent teenagers that we know of. The bad ending shows that if left unchecked, he'd simply keep doing it. He's one of the least punished characters, suffering a quick death and then rebirth as a cat instead of a human, none of which are nearly as bad as what the other kids went through. Having a shit life does not make me more sympathetic to him. And I'm thoroughly unconvinced that one conversation would make him a person worthy of a second chance. Aki saying that he's really a good guy is meaningless to me. He wasn't a good enough guy to not murder people, including in the bad end, the character saying this to him. I think the most common defense of this part is that it's optional. You don't have to go to this little island, you can just walk on into the end of truth. But I would argue that, well, it's not presented like this is a bad thing to do. It doesn't give you a bad ending. In fact, on the Steam version, it gives you an achievement. You are clearly intended, encouraged even, to experience this piece of content that was put into the video game. And it isn't good. This is the reason why I think MISAO is really bad. And it gives me more to appreciate about Madfather. Madfather came out only a year after the release of MISAO, and it feels like more than just its own self-contained work. Part of its construction feels, to me, like a response to the exact criticisms I brought up against MISAO, which I imagine were also levied towards it at the time, or perhaps then came to the same conclusions independently. One parallel between the games that I didn't mention was that both Kurata and the father are secretly killers, instigators fueled by evil desire, but they are presented very differently. Throughout the game, there's a contrast between Ai's memories of Alfred as a loving father and the horrible monsters and death traps that serve as a literal representation of his evil. The characters fail to confront him on this until it affects them, and as a result, they are made his victims as well. The morality presented in Mad Father does not excuse his crimes because he has the capacity to be kind, loving, and reliable. Although it's called Mad Father, the game is not concerned with his moral character, but rather his actions. And thankfully, Mad Father didn't have a truth mode that sought to ruin that. You may notice I said that in past tense. But before that, here's 1 minute of my friends and I making fun of this game.
That's what happens when you try to date Toma. Does he know from experience? What is he talking about? What if there is no reality? It's all just fake shit we make up in our minds?
Are you seeing this? It's a little baby there.
Oh. Oh, wow, I'm a little baby now. Tasty. Make
Penis.
a bit.
Stop. No.
Even half of her lines.
You will be cursed.
Ooh.
She's so fucking stupid.
She just didn't register that?
Oh my god, that's right.
I was actually bullied in school, so I have a sad backstory. Damn it. Every single time, it's always handsome, great face. Wow, he's literally me.
I don't think you want to say that about this.
It's wounded. Just like me. Can we not give this much fucking backstory to this guy, please? I thought you were the one person who would accept me.
Fuck my chud cell life. This is
Finally,
awful.
Finally, I have a high school girlfriend.
So, both MISAO and Mad Father received Steam ports and later remakes. Although MISAO has retained basically the same story content throughout all its iterations, Mad Father was given an addition in its 2020 remake where you can play through a shorter version of the main game as an adult Aya, called Blood Mode. Most of the main story cutscenes are either removed or truncated, and you can skip steps in a few puzzles, so you can get through it an hour or two faster than normal. But there is some new story content where you're given a whole different interpretation of the narrative. Now, when I started this video, I truly only intended for it to be about MISAO. I probably wasn't even going to bring up Mad Father that much. But what I saw in Blood Mode was so terrible that I couldn't just not say anything. Like, I thought I was going to complain about how the remake changed some of the puzzles in normal mode. As if that was going to be my biggest issue. I'll try not to complain about the gameplay too much, but I do wish it was something more like hard mode in the witch's house, instead of mostly being the same thing as normal mode. Anyway, most of the big revelatory moment comes in reading the mother's diary that suddenly appears near the end of the game. This reveals that Aya's mother, Monica Dravis, comes from a long line of murderous researchers. She's totally on board with the mad scientist stuff, but is conflicted on it when her grandmother tells her not to. Aya's father was in jail for numerous previous murders, including an attempt on Monica's life, indicated from his own diary, which was present in the original game. And Monica wrote to him saying he should come to her mansion. So basically, Monica gives Alfred the means to conduct all his experiments, and encouraged him to do it to carry on her family's legacy without her being directly involved. And also she planned for Aya to do the same. Not only that, several scenes imply that Alfred didn't want Aya to become a killer, and one of his major motivations to turn her into a doll was so that she wouldn't end up like him, and the murderous bloodline would end for good. This is fucking dog shit. On just every level, this is a shoddily implemented retcon, just an attempt to recapture what already existed while subverting the morality in the main story, with very few changes made to the original script to reflect anyone's new motivation. Do I even need to say that it's stupid for a man who has murdered and continues to murder countless people, including everyone he's ever loved, to suddenly take a firm moral stance against killing? That after turning hundreds of random people into dolls for his own pleasure, this time it's for the greater good? Or how ridiculous it is that the mother, who was clearly upset over Alfred having an affair, and who cared enough about her daughter to try and avoid tarnishing her image of her father, turns out to be a manipulative psycho merely using these two to fulfill some evil bloodline obligation? Well, it is. It's all dumb. And in the end, Aya says that she loves her father, that she understands him. Forget that the whole point of the game was that people let their love for this man cloud their vision against his atrocities. It turns out he's nice on the inside. And then she hugs him, just like Aki and Kurata. And I just wondered, why? Why do the extended modes of these two games go through so much effort to paint creepy murderous men in a sympathetic light and turn their undead female victims into the greater scope villain? I've tried to provide individualized explanations for why both games go down the same extremely similar path, but saying it all together like this makes it clear that this is not mere coincidence. It's the writer. Let me bring this video back to MISAO for a minute. In one of the later updates to the original version of MISAO, a male protagonist option was added. Playing as him, things are mostly the same, but his personality is very different. Whereas the female Aki is quick to violence and so callous as to joke around about others dying, the male Aki is very normal. He doesn't want to kill anyone, and he reacts in an appropriate shock whenever someone dies. The ending segment is completely different, since the female Aki will go and kill whoever you choose, but the male Aki will resist it, only forced to make a choice when something else turns it into a trolley problem. Now, there's some in-universe lore about the two Akis being different coexisting individuals, and of course the developer wanted the two routes to be different enough that a player might consider it worthwhile to try both. But here, you have the most clear-cut example of a male and female pair where, despite them fulfilling the exact same role, the man is characterized by innocence and compassion, and the woman by violence and inhumanity. That's just sexism, like on a sheer definitional level. And when you think about it, this just explains everything. Why did MISAO go from nearly invisible victim to main antagonist? Why did they change Monika's backstory to make her actively evil rather than just indifferent to Alfred's evil a whole 8 real-world years later? Why did the story focus so much on Kurata being bullied? Why is Alfred's love acknowledged as valid? Why did Yoshino have to repent for her actions when Kurata just had to accept himself? Why in that one scene did Maria have to rip off all her clothes to stop that one guy from dying and then she just sat with her pussy on the nasty dungeon floor for however long it took for Alfred to come back? Why is every female character above the age of 12 motivated by being in love with a man? And why does female Aki try to possess male Aki's body to make him kill someone? Well, it's all just a clumsy splattering together of different simple tropes that came together to create something absurdly misogynistic. Let me once again bring back the comparisons I made earlier to conclude this lesson. In The Witch's House, the narrative is ultimately so simple that no message regarding gender can be coherently derived from it. On the other end of the scale, there's the elaborately detailed narrative of Corpse Party, which, despite all its flaws, is pretty strongly against misogyny. It's a story where the main character and emotional centerpiece is Naomi, and her arc revolves chiefly around Seiko. The purpose of the writing is to evoke endearment and empathy towards its characters, to make them like real and relatable people instead of a stereotype or a caricature. And importantly, their story would not be the same if one or both of them were men. So perhaps the greatest example of MISAO misunderstanding its inspiration is that even though its final scene is similar to that of Corpse Party, you can play through it as a male protagonist. And in this version, unlike with the female Aki, MISAO will profess her love. This failure of writing, or this bias from the writer, is ultimately what dragged down the story of not just this game, but also the remake of Mad Father, a game I otherwise could enjoy. And that's why I think MISAO is really bad. Before I end this video off with some funny Mad Father clips, I just want to clarify some things. No, I'm not trying to cancel Sen, this is just a quality critique. I hope we can all be cordial and mature about this. You know, even if I'm wrong, I'm actually a kind of reliable person on the inside. And I'm sure Sen is too, I just hope whenever he makes another game, he never adds an extra mode to it. The friends featured in the clips were Animal Jason, a fellow YouTuber in the games review genre, and Vile Rebus, a solo dev who has made a horror game in RPG Maker. Maybe you should check that out. That art of the Wolf RPG editor was drawn by Beep Zeep of Large Man fame. I just thought that was a really funny bit. And yeah, guess that's it. Hope these clips are funny.
I love the super detailed flame, by the way. That's like crazy.
Oh my god, it's this fucking guy.
I told you he wore a hat in this
I
game.
hate this. Oh my god. So this guy's like the Nick Fury of the RPG Maker cinematic universe.
You heard about the Awoni Initiative.
I'm putting together a team of extremely traumatized little girls. Innocent daughter with a gigantic fucking bow on her head. There's QuickTime events?
What a fucking bitch. Goddamn. Crazy hater. Oh. And raises them now.
It's looking like you got some kind of course here. Typical stuff. You got some kind of mad fodder. So you'll go find the truth.
The truth? Oh, I don't like the word truth in Sen games.
Every RPG Maker game is about like a little girl with like a
Sharp object.
a knife or a sharp object.
Oh my god.
He was doing Elon Musk shit.
What do you mean?
Harry
What are
the
you talking about?
sausage limits move.
Oh, it limits movement too.
They literally call this shit the gimmick room. Oh wait, there crack.
Ah.
Crack.
Oh my fucking god. The fucking zoom in. May you be smiled upon.
What?
A good luck charm.
What?
This you dumbass fucking bitch. Jesus fucking Christ.
What was her problem? Fucking mad.
Why the fuck did you just do that?
Oh, I do a quick time event to climb up the cliff.
Just trying to cop a feel.
Mom, one last drink. Shady drugs.
Crack.
Wunderbar. It does kind of slay.
Yeah.
Good girl. Jesus Christ.